I'm delighted, Mark Tully, to be here in a conversation with you.
Well, I'm honoured to be in a conversation with you.
Yeah.
Having read your book, I can see how learned you are.
Well,
much more learned than I am.
No, that's not true. And Mark Tully needs no introduction. And I'm delighted that he's gone through the book, and we've had a conversation before about his views on the book. I was wondering if you'd like to start with some general impressions about the book, or you'd like me to talk about the issue of, say, the central issue of history, or maybe we'll come to that after you have some general comments.
Yes, I would like to start off on a more general point than history, and that is that I very much understand and appreciate your whole idea of mutually looking at each other, and I also fully understand the point that if you're going to have a mutual conversation, a mutually respectful conversation, you have to understand the person from a different tradition with whom you are having your conversation. But I have one problem with this book, that it seems to me that mutual conversation, mutual respect should lead to mutual enrichment.
Yes.
And my problem is that as a Christian, as basically a Westerner, although I've lived so many years in this country, I don't see you giving really any space to the way that we have been brought up and the way we think.
Okay, this is a very important point. So this leads to the history issue, perhaps, because the central idea that I'm bringing out is what I call history centrism, which, just to give an overview, is the approach to history that God intervened in unique, absolute ways. These are non-negotiable. If we were to not accept these historical interventions as they have been taught, then we really have no other recourse. So the historicity of certain events becomes non-negotiable. So this point of view is what I call history centrism. And I make the case, I think, convincingly, or at least I hope, that the Abrahamic traditions tend to be history-centric, or at least far more so than the Indian traditions. Now, the issue I have with history centrism is it won't allow an alternative approach which says I am a good person, like Gandhi, but I am not part of that history centrism. But if the person is living a good life and believes in spirituality and is very good to human beings, but is not part of that history centrism, then the attitude of Christians, at least the clergy, not all theologians, but many of them, has been that this won't do. In other words, unless you accept the historicity of the various claims as being true, just being a good person and believing in that there's one divine and living a good life is not good enough.
Well, you see, I think that perhaps that is not allowing sufficient room for modern thinking among Christians, not allowing sufficient room perhaps for developments. When I was young, yes, definitely, we tended to be brought up to believe that in St. John's Gospel it says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And therefore that means that there is only one way. But actually, it never says that in the Gospel. It just says, I am the way. So there is a way, in other words. Perhaps it would be better if it said a way from your point of view. But we do admit as Christians now, at least many of us do, that if you place too much stress on the historical Jesus, you do end up in a position where it's difficult to have religious pluralism.
Correct.
But it was an Anglican bishop who said to me that he felt that religious pluralism was the greatest problem facing Christianity.
Who was he?
So he was the Bishop of Kingston when he came out to India.
Okay.
And incidentally, when you talk about religious respect, it was very interesting because this conversation, this remark of his came out in the course of a conversation with Maulana Wahiduddin, who is a great Islamic scholar. And when the Maulana was asked about religious pluralism, he said words to the effect, I believe Islam is true, but I respect, and he used the word respect, all other religions. Now, of course, the big question in that is respect.
What does it mean?
What does it mean?
Are they legitimate?
Well, now, again, what does the word legitimate mean?
Okay.
You see, one of the interesting things, but first of all, let me just say one other thing to you. I do admit this problem about historic-centric, but I do think that a religion with history as part of its theology does have some relevance, particularly towards the whole question of evolution. Because if we are evolving, then it's quite possible, in my view, that during that evolution there may be events of particular importance in the evolution of our thinking.
Yes.
Secondly, I do believe that the historic centre, we do have to be absolutely certain that we say this is not the only way to God, and I would say that absolutely, definitely. Lastly, one other thing about it, and then I'll give you a shout.
Sure, all right.
Is this, that it seems to me that in some ways you have a historic history in Hinduism,
Yes.
with Krishna's remark in,
Yes.
in the Gita about
Yes.
he will come
Yes.
when he's needed.
Yes. Okay. Now, the fact that the Bishop of Canterbury,
Kingston, yeah.
said that one of the problems facing Christianity is this history-centrism.
Well, is religious pluralism.
Is religious pluralism.
Yeah.
But he did not diagnose it as history-centrism.
No,
He said that there is a symptom called lack of pluralism. I'm diagnosing that symptom and referring to the underlying cause as history-centrism.
I think the word, I can't remember the word he used, but I think he was talking about something slightly broader than history-centrism.
Okay.
The overall exclusivity of Christianity.
Yes.
The sort of exclusivity which at one stage, but
Yes.
no longer,
Yes.
led the Catholic Church to say there is no salvation outside the Church.
Right.
That sort of
So,
exclusivity.
so if the lack of exclusivity, of course, that translates to lack of pluralism. I mean, the exclusivity leads to lack of pluralism. Then my philosophical question is, what causes the exclusivity? And my claim is that there can be only one true history in a history-centric tradition, and that is the cause of exclusivity. So if I'm trying to diagnose what causes the exclusivity, I reach at the doorstep of history-centrism. And I'll give one example and would like your comment on it. The status of Jesus is not agreed upon between Muslims and Christians, because being Son of God is very important to Christianity, and just downgrading him as another prophet is not acceptable. And the reason it is not acceptable is because there is original sin, and this original sin condemns all humanity because of what Adam and Eve did. It condemns all humanity, to all progeny, to eternal damnation. Now, the only way to repair this condition, because God feels sorry for people, wants to repair the condition, is to incarnate the Son of God, and through his sacrifice allow a way to redeem the original sin. And this is the Nicene Creed. What is the Nicene Creed? Which is a required belief of all the Christian denominations. I mean, I've gone and talked to many denominations and asked them, is the Nicene Creed, a belief that is required? And pretty much everyone has said, yes, that is what is required. So the history-centrism is encoded in the Nicene Creed. Now, the virgin birth becomes important, because if he did not have a virgin birth, then he would also be born sinner, because he would also be a progeny of Adam and Eve. And since all progeny of Adam and Eve are condemned to eternal damnation, Jesus by birth would be a sinner. And to prevent that from happening, he's the only person ever born who is not progeny of Adam and Eve because of virgin birth. So since he is God's progeny and not progeny from Adam and Eve, therefore he does not have the same condition that the rest of us have. Now this is an extraordinary statement, an extraordinary belief, and a profound belief. And therefore the Muslims removing that he's Son of God and the virgin birth, and saying we love him and respect him, most serious Christian theologians will say that won't cut it because you undermine the whole system, in a sense. Now, this is an example of history-centrism versus history-centrism. And now, to give you the flip side, if Muhammad is in fact the final prophet and supersedes the teachings of Jesus while respecting Jesus, but saying you are running on Windows 7 and we have got Windows 8. So it's more recent. That's sort of the Islamic argument. That not that Windows 7 was bad, but we have a more recent version, and therefore everybody should upgrade to it. Now, if you want to validate that, the Muslims have to not accept Jesus as the one Son of God, because a Son of God cannot be superseded by a regular prophet. So he has to be brought down or brought to the level of a prophet, a great one, a very extraordinary one, but still just a prophet. So for Islam to work, Jesus' virgin birth and Jesus' being Son of God cannot be upheld. Otherwise the prophet cannot really supersede Jesus. And for Christianity to work, that one requirement that he is Son of God and had virgin birth cannot be compromised. So you have two systems of history-centrism whose exclusivity comes by virtue of this requirement.
But you see, I'm not sure that you're right on the virgin birth.
Okay.
That is one interpretation of the virgin birth.
Okay.
I was recently in a church in Eastbourne dedicated to St. Mary the Virgin.
Okay.
And the priest at Christmas time preached a sermon saying he didn't believe in the virgin birth.
Okay.
One of the great debates, you see, Christianity isn't quite as written in stone, I don't believe,
Yes.
as I think with respect you imply. And as you know from the early history of the church, has been marked by debates about
Yes.
the exact humanity of Jesus
And Mary.
the exact, much more importantly, the exact divinity of Jesus and the exact humanity of Jesus. You know, people have been debating, there have been huge controversies, heresies, councils of the church. Because, but nowadays, more and more, Christian theologians, I think, are saying that, or at least lots of them are saying that, you know, we can't be totally precise about these things. Son of God is another thing. Tomes of books have been written as to exactly what Son of God means, and also don't forget the term Son of Man, which is frequently used in the Gospels.
Yes.
You know, on top of which, I think I go back to what I said that with the Bishop of Kingston, that I notice in general, even in the Roman Catholic Church, that there is a striving towards making Christianity more capable of living with other religions. As I said to you the other day, you know, there's been a wonderful book by Father Jacques Dupuis, a Jesuit, an interesting...
I ordered it already after you told me.
Well, now, don't you think it's a good book?
I'm going to it's coming.
Yes.
Yes.
And
Raimundo Pornicer wrote a lot about these things. Also.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Well, he wrote about the Jesus of Hinduism, if I remember rightly.
Yes.
So there is this effort to go, and therefore, in a sense, if I come back to my original point, what we should be trying to do, I think, is not point a finger at Christianity
I understand.
for being historic-centric.
Yes. But to understand ourselves, each of us, a little better as a starting point, I think is a good idea. Now, I am aware that Christianity has been internally debated from its beginning.
Yeah.
But there is the prevailing group and then the dissenting group. In any power structure, there is a center, and then there's people who are sort of shouting from the sides, and they're considered heretics, and they are, some of the mystics are persecuted. So, if you look at the trajectory of the power structure, would you agree that for the majority of its history, the trajectory of the power structure, not all thinkers necessarily in compliance, but the trajectory of the power structure has been this exclusivity of the historicity?
Yes, if you put it like that, I suppose I would find it difficult to argue with that. But after all, what we're talking about is having a discussion in the early 21st century.
Where things have changed.
And yes, and the whole point of our discussion and your book
Yes.
and many, many other discussions is
How to move forward.
how to move forward.
Yes,
you see.
I want to get to that.
One
Yes.
other thing I would say is that whilst, yes, I would argue that on the whole the exclusivity has been central to the teachings of the Church, and there has been the whole missionary enterprise, and there was the second Bishop of Calcutta, the famous Bishop Heber, who in one of his hymns talked about the heathen in
Yes.
their blindness,
Yes.
bow down to stick and stone. There has been all that. But equally, of course, there have been very absolutist statements of Hinduism
Yes,
as well.
yes. And they are also history-centric, and I
Yes.
criticize them too.
Yes.
I consider that turning Hinduism into a linear chronology of history and claiming an absolute historicity of that is a Semitization of Hinduism. And I mentioned that, and I critique that also.
Yeah, you do. You mentioned that in your book.
Yes. Now, a point I want to make is that in this research, I looked at the official websites of most major denominations of Christianity. And in the tab called definition, they always mention the Nicene Creed. Always, every one of them. That these 4 or 5 articles of belief, which are all history-centric, are the mandatory requirements of membership. And the Nicene Creed is actually recited in many rituals, in many ceremonies.
Yeah, we recite it every time we celebrate Holy Communion, both in the Anglican
Yes.
and I'm pretty sure in the Roman Catholic.
In the Roman Catholic Church. But now, so I think that the Nicene Creed as an encapsulation of history-centrism has been there, continues to be there, at least in the United States. I think maybe Europe is a little less Christian, intense, maybe the more liberal, But in the United States, which is what the book is focused on, I would say that they are exceedingly history-centric. And the interesting thing is that the Protestants tend to be even more so. Now, the engagement with Hinduism and Vedanta from the Christian side, with Father B. Griffiths and many others, and Raimundo Parniker, if you look at the list of Christian thinkers who have engaged with the attitude of let's see what we can learn and what we can adapt and adopt, it has rarely been a Protestant. Maybe Anglicans are an exception. But the mainline Protestants...
We regard ourselves as Catholics.
Yes, theologically.
Yes.
Theologically, you are Catholics.
Yes, yes. And if I could just say one thing as well there. I think one of the reasons why, and this is a very important point relating to what I was saying before, one of the reasons why you would think the Protestants are more historic-centric is because obviously they don't have that same doctrine of the Church that the Roman Catholics have. And the Roman Catholic doctrine of the Church is a doctrine which gives the Church a power. In your book you suggest perhaps that the revelation comes entirely from the Bible, but of course in the Roman Catholic Church the revelation also comes, the revelation comes from it as well.
Yes.
The doctrine, the teachings come from the Church as well, and people even like Cardinal Newman, the famous British convert from Anglicanism to Roman Catholicism, who was only recently beatified, I think it was, by the Pope when he came to Britain. Cardinal Newman has a whole lot in his thinking about the development of doctrine. So once again, we're not set in stone in quite the way that I think you
Yes,
suggest.
I think Catholicism has been more flexible than Protestantism in general. Would you say so? Not with the exception of the Anglican.
Well, of course, in a way,
if you look at Baptists, Southern Baptists, you look at Methodists, they're very fixed in their idea.
Yes, I would. I would. I think I would agree with you. I wouldn't like to I don't want to say anything against any of my fellow Christians.
But here's an interesting thing, Mark. When I talk to serious church people from the Southern Baptist Church, Methodist Church, and I describe my term, they haven't heard of this term history-centrism, and they feel a little odd or uncomfortable. But the substance of it, they say, you got it. You really got it. It isn't true. This is the only historicity that ever happened. And this is important to know. And people who are being liberal and flexible and kind of, they haven't understood it. They are mixing it up. So in other words, that camp of the church, which is very powerful in the United States, I mean, they elect presidents, and they're very powerful. They would say that this liberal thinker that you're referring to is not authentic. That's sort of their claim. And they happen to have the clout, the power to propagate and be in the school systems and control White House and all kinds of things. I would say certainly the religious right in the United States, which comprises a very large number, are history-centric without even apologizing. I mean, certainly the Christian Zionists who believe that not only is the past absolute and exclusive, but even the future and the end of time and all of that is determined. So they don't think that calling them history-centric is a problem for them. They think that somebody finally got it. And they have their problem is the Hindu guru, which I'll come to in a moment, who goes around saying that we are the same. And they can't stand it. Because they're saying we're not the same, because we are talking about the historicity, and you are making trivializing it. And so their view of a very liberal Anglican or Catholic would be exactly that. That, you know, you're sort of playing games and you don't understand the boundaries, and this is right. Like Billy Graham wouldn't agree with a non-history centric view. And Billy Graham says inaugurated more presidents, you know, every president, the whole inauguration, and he's sort of the head of Christianity, American Christianity in a figure. So if you look at him and the mainstream Protestant churches as sort of the voice of Christianity, then the very liberal cutting-edge people that you're referring to are not in the power structure, in America at least.
No, I think
that's sad. That is sad.
I think, again, to say for my own church, the Anglican Church, the Episcopalian Church in America, there are some very liberal thinkers, and of course some of them are so liberal that they're threatening to create a schism within the church.
Yes.
But what I would say to that is two things. I would say, yes, but that doesn't carry our discussion any further forward.
It gives you a base point. And it gives you a
well, yes, in a way, yes. But the other thing I would say, of course, is that, as you have yourself said, a hugely powerful, perhaps the most powerful body of Hinduism in this country, powerful in the same way as you talk about the American Christians and their power, is in fact, as you rightly said, a historiocentric, Semitized version of Hinduism.
Yes. Now, the Semitized Hinduism, I think, is a recent phenomenon. The history-centric version of Hinduism is a more recent political movement. Would you agree? It is not something.
But it goes back further than the BJP and the Jan Sangh.
But it's still in terms of the long period of Hinduism, it's still relatively a short kind of a thing.
I would. Yeah, I mean this particular version of it. Yes. Whether there have been earlier versions, I don't know.
Because we've always had this idea that there's many paths and then there's this avatar, but somebody else can be an avatar. So even if you tell a Vaishnavite, I've talked to some of the really the ones you would consider very solidly history-centric Krishna people, Krishna bhakts. That what if somebody a Native American comes to you and says, we have a story of God visiting us, and it's a totally independent story, and almost every one of them has said, I have no reason to refute it, because God may well have said that. So that means that while I believe in the historicity of Krishna, that doesn't mean that it's an exclusivity claim. You see, the exclusivity claim doesn't arise because there is no condition equivalent to original sin which has to be redeemed, which only can be redeemed once by one Son of God. That condition, the starting point being is different.
But of course, again, the whole doctrine of redemption is under question, has been questioned before, what exactly is meant by it. And for many people it sits very uncomfortably, because what on earth has happened to all those people who, before Jesus died?
That's a very uncomfortable question. And why is God in hell?
But you see, I think, let's go back to this question of Hindu avatars.
Right.
The very idea of an avatar is historiocentric.
Yes.
Isn't it? It's an intervention, a human being.
But it needn't be exclusive.
No. So my thing is that I think the important thing is broader than historiocentric. I think it is exclusivity. I'm not denying that history isn't at the center, in a way, of this exclusivity.
Okay.
But the crucial thing that we have to get over, I think, and the crucial discussion which could be held, I believe, is how do you remain a Christian and yet not be exclusive?
Excellent. So I've asked this question to several Christians. I've said, would you be willing to, as a good Christian, and one of the persons who's worked with me for 1 or 2 years is a really solid Christian, theologian, teaches, and I've asked this question, and she's been churning in her own head while editing this book, her questions about Christianity, and she writes an endorsement in this. And I've asked this question to lots of Christians, that would it be okay for you as a Christian to have this set of, whatever set of beliefs you want, but consider that this other person somewhere who has a different set of beliefs about God and the nature of the divine, could be that the ultimate supreme being is feminine, not even masculine, and the human potential of oneness with God, all of these ideas that others believe. And would it be, is it possible for you to say that that is also legitimate, that is okay, or does it threaten you? And I've always found them, while being nice at first and saying, yes, we will respect that, but after they've churned, they come back and say, you know, it troubles me. Something about it troubles me, because my doctrine won't allow space for that. What do you think of that?
Well, I think it is. I would put it like this. I wouldn't quite use the word troubles, I think. I would say that, yes, of course, if you want to believe in Christianity, and I personally do want to continue to believe in Christianity, and in a funny way I want to believe in Christianity for a very Hindu reason, because to me the doctrine of karma has been very important in my life. One of the reasons I've stayed in India is because somehow or other I believe my birth in India was...
I think you're an Indian in a previous life, well, and you had to go and do some things elsewhere and come back home.
Well, maybe.
Yes.
But as my karma is to have been born a Christian. And Mahatma Gandhi used to say, who you very rightly, deeply admire in your book, Mahatma Gandhi used to say that that religion into which you are born is probably the religion which is natural to you.
Yes.
So we all want to remain Christians.
Okay.
We all know that at the centre of Christianity there is a figure called Jesus Christ. We all know that incidentally Jesus is a historical figure because there is evidence for his life outside the teachings of the church. And we all know that this does mean that we have to think very hard about how we can respect and live with other religions. And I've actually only last week I've just completed an article for a book by in honour of the Archbishop of Delhi, the Roman Catholic Archbishop of Delhi, and I've written a whole chapter, part of it inspired by your book incidentally, in which I have said we have to develop a theology of respect.
Yes.
And I think that is where we should go towards, not have too many arguments about history-centricism, and that is what you talk about in your book as well.
Yes, and I want to get there. I want to get there. Now, the let's look at the Hindu side of this problem.
Yeah.
The gurus who go about saying that we are all the same, and Jesus is a state of consciousness. So it's not a historical person. I mean, I have quoted many gurus who would say that.
Yes.
So their idea of embracing Christianity is a hug, which a Christian like you would say, no thanks, I don't mind being hugged, but if the cost of that is that I have to give up the historicity, the historical uniqueness of Jesus and the virgin birth and the resurrection and the whole world, the what I have called the Nicene Creed's history-centrism, if that is the price I have to pay, then I'm being asked to compromise. So there is a problem from the other side also. The Hindu hug through gurus who think they're doing a favor, and they're naive. They're not informed. So my book is also to inform them that perhaps a true mutual respect for Christians would be that you should respect their belief as being history-centric, and you should be okay with it. So the problem of being okay with the other difference and respecting difference is from both sides.
Yes.
So while we started this conversation saying that this is something, I'm really pushing Christians to sort of respect those who may not have any idea of Jesus and don't want to subscribe to that because they have their own tradition. I have an equal problem, maybe a stronger problem, being a Hindu, that a lot of gurus don't get it. So what do you think of the Hindu guru who goes around getting a lot of Western followers who are sort of naive? They're not solidly anchored in their own Christian idea. They don't really quite understand Christianity. A lot of them don't.
Yeah.
You would agree with that, right?
Yes,
There's a lot of them who don't.
Yes.
And so
a lot of them are rejected.
yeah, they just sort of go into this. And then when some guy raises his hand up and asks, the guru, what do you think of Jesus? I mean, he's not well informed. So the typical guru tends to give this answer that, oh, we're all the same, it's inside your heart. And I mean, but what about all the historical events and the historicity? You've just sort of dismissed that to the side. And if I were Christian, if I had been given birth due to my karma as a Christian, I would say that's really not quite, helpful to us. What do you think of that? The guru hug.
Well, I think the guru hug is dangerous.
It is dangerous.
It's dangerous for perhaps a slightly different reason to what you say. One thing's about Christianity, one thing's about having an institutional religion, is that there is an authentication about it.
Okay.
It's authenticated by the witness of the church down the years, by the historical event, the fact that there was a person called Jesus. We do know that he was crucified. We can't be certain what happened in the resurrection, but we do know that something incredible must have happened, because when Jesus died, the disciples, as you would imagine they would do, were terrified and went all over the place. How did the church then arise out of this? I personally believe something remarkable must have happened at the resurrection. So, but all this is in a sense authenticated by tradition.
Yes, yes.
One of the problems with gurus, as I see it, is that the gurus are not authenticated by anyone. Gurus are up and up, if you see what I mean. You know what I mean?
This is my anubhav, my experience. This is my truth.
Yeah.
So a very interesting discussion is Christians feeling that this Hindu claim to truth, not being history-centric, has the weakness of moral relativism, of anybody claiming whatever they want to.
Yes, the Pope would certainly say that.
Pope would certainly say that. Yes. So you see I am sympathetic in the sense that I fully try to understand what history-centrism is, why it's there, and what its claims are. So history-centric claim towards a religion which is not history-centric is, what are your bearings? Where is your moral compass? What gives you certainty that your experience was not a hallucination? This is what they would often say.
Yes.
So the differences as a starting point are real, and without saying that one is superior to the other, but calling them truth claims rather than truth, because in this book I don't call either one of them truth or false, but I say they're truth claims. But saying that there are different truth claims, they are divergent, these differences matter to their respective faiths, is a good starting point, I think, for both the gurus to learn this.
Yes, in a way it is, but in a way it seems to me to be setting people at loggerheads slightly still, But let me come on to something.
What would you suggest the guru should do? We should also discuss what would we suggest the Christian to do who wants to remain Christian and understand and believe in the historicity of Jesus. How could he respect the Hindu for having completely different way of life and different worldview? But on the other hand, I also want to find out, what do you think the Hindu should do who feels he has a universalism? His universalism is that you do this sadhana and you reach a higher state of consciousness, and you need unity with God, and you do not need an intermediary, and you do not need historicity, or you do not need the church, because all that is sort of gone. You can supersede all that. What would you suggest what would you suggest to such a person as a Christian?
Well, I think I'm not sure that I have any absolute answer.
But it's a good question. Right?
What I'm trying to avoid all the time is to be absolute about anything. Because one of the things which I really appreciate in your book is what you say about certainty. And I have written a whole book on the certainty of uncertainty myself, quite a short book and not a scholarly book like yours. So I struggle within myself, as far as Christianity goes, to reconcile these historic claims with my conviction that the certainty of that we have to be very cautious about certainties. And I would say that as a Christian we do have one fallback position, and that is the great concept of the mystery of God,
Yes.
the great mystery.
Yes,
You know.
yes.
So when we think about that, I think there are two things which you'll perhaps underestimate on the Christian side in this book. One is the mystery of God. Well, three, I would say. One is the mystery of God, which does take us beyond just bare literal historical statements. That's what I think. Secondly is the greatest thing perhaps about Christianity is not the doctrine of salvation, but what the doctrine of salvation shows, which is that the prime energy in this world and the prime energy of God as well is love. Mm-hmm. And I think that's
it's a great statement, yes.
Yeah, a hugely important and profound belief. The third thing I think you're a bit unfair is I do think that the Holy Spirit is a doctrine of immanence, and you say it hasn't been well developed, but after all it's been part of the Trinity, part of the creed,
but you know,
since the whole business started.
Yes, theologians themselves, and I'm going to have a discussion with Francis Clooney, who's a well-known theologian of Hinduism. Theologians themselves say that Holy Spirit has not been developed, written about, theorized, explained. It's sort of there, but we don't quite know, we haven't figured out as much. It has not been promoted as much.
Well, you know, I would have to say from my personal experience that it was always explained to me. And I can remember sitting in that church when I was a university undergraduate, hearing a sermon preached on the Holy Spirit and thinking to myself that actually the Holy Spirit is the person of the Trinity who means much more to me than God or Jesus does. And I understood the Trinity from this sermon and from my own thinking that God is the Creator, Jesus is the Redeemer, but the Holy Spirit is the presence who is immanent in us in a way and stays in us. And even if you take the question of Jesus, we very often pray that Jesus should be within us.
But in that case, when a Christian sees a mandir and he sees a murti, the murti, the pratan pratishtha has been done. So the idea is that there is the divine presence, immanence in this. Why wouldn't a Christian then want a murti of this kind installed in a church? Because, after all, the divine presence is one, and the divine presence in this particular village happened to be in that murti, and the divine presence in another village happened to be in that particular deity, that particular form of goddess. So, a person who truly believes in the immanence, and that immanence is not history-centric, would therefore embrace and allow all these deities to be brought into the church.
Well, I think there's one historical answer to that, of course, which is the abhorrence of idolatry in the Old Testament and in the Ten Commandments. And I can remember as a child in Calcutta seeing these puja processions with these colourful gods being taken down to the river to be immersed. And I felt a sort of horror, literally. I was appalled by it.
But because of his teaching?
Because of this question of idolatry, which is so important, And of course the idolatry, it hasn't been important in the sense it's important to believe in it, but I mean it has been important.
It's a historical condition.
Yes, it's a historical condition.
But a Hindu would say, and I've had these discussions, that the idea of idolatry in the pagan European traditions from which the word idol was made, created, the whole theology against idolatry came about, is not applicable to the idea of murti. Because it is not that we are worshipping the stone as a stone. We are worshipping the divine presence as in the form of the stone. So we are not really doing idolatry. I mean, one could argue, well, Hindu theologians should argue, that our murti is not an idol. Unfortunately, Hindus have started translating murtis as idols. And you'll see Times of India writing an article that the idol of this is being immersed, and the Hindus themselves have done this problem. So naturally the Christian, looking at the word idol and being conditioned that idolatry is one of the commandments, you got to be against those guys. So therefore there's this problem. But what if we were to remove the word idol and we were to substitute the word murti, and one of my non-translatables in chapter 5 is murti is not equal to idol. And to explain this very principle, that now what happens to the church posture towards a form which the people who are worshipping that form are saying is not an idol, it is actually God's immanence. So you should translate it as Holy Spirit has taken this form and be able to welcome it into the church.
Well, you see, I would say that certain... Oh God, is that mine? Sorry. Let me switch to off. I would say that... I'll switch off altogether. I would say that... come on, get off. I say yes. I would say that I'd put it like this: that in my view, the Hindu theology of an idol or a murti is perfectly acceptable to me. I fully understand that they are not actually worshipping the murti, but worshipping the divine presence there. And I would say that anything which is an aid to someone feeling the divine presence is acceptable if the aid is not mistaken for the presence itself.
Yes.
And I would also say that in many Roman Catholic practices, actually statues are very important.
But the mainline Protestants don't accept that.
No,
they don't accept.
No.
So their thing about immanence is further away.
From
the Murti Puja than the Catholics were, who one could argue that they might be accommodating. But you see, the question becomes political. The question becomes if they were to accept Murti Puja as divine presence and were to accept a Hindu theologian's argument that, look, you guys have Holy Spirit, so here is a form of Holy Spirit that came to my village. In my village, this was Holy Spirit. So there's nothing contrarian to that in their doctrine. So the rejection of that is entirely a political rejection. I mean, they really have no there's no mandate that says Holy Spirit does not. There is no historical exclusivity of Holy Spirit. So Holy Spirit could come.
I think the point. I think that being monotheistic.
Okay.
Obviously, there is a greater sensitivity about the immanence of God and the limitations you can place on that belief. And you talk a great deal about dualism, but I wanted to come to dualism in a minute. You talk a great deal about dualism, and yes, in a sense, we are dualistic, and because of the importance of monotheism to us, one has to be quite careful about immanence. Otherwise, you could end up with what we would consider to be polytheism or something other than the monotheistic belief.
So the idea of Holy Spirit as immanence has limitations because it cannot threaten the monotheistic exclusivity. It cannot threaten. It can go up to a point, but and what some theologians have told me is that the Holy Spirit has always been looked at as some suspicious way of sneaking in something that could topple the real order, and so it's allowed to go up to a point.
Maybe I don't know that. I'm not I'm not a trained theologian at all, but my belief about the Holy Spirit, I think, and I would have to think a lot about this, but I would say that the Holy Spirit is immanent as something which can be immanent within us humans. I would not like to take the Holy Spirit further than that, I think. Whereas, of course, I realize that you would take the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, we would to us, the Holy
Spirit. After all, the importance to me, really,
Yes.
is that God is immanent in this world.
Yes,
you know.
yes, but then to us,
To me.
the reason we don't use the term Holy Spirit, because we think it's limited in that sense, is that to us, Ganga is divine presence.
Yeah, yeah.
And Mount Kailash is divine presence.
Yeah.
And the sacredness of trees and sacredness of earth, Mother Earth, the whole Mother Earth is... So to us, excluding the divinity of all that is sort of demolishes the underlying philosophy of Vedanta's unity consciousness. Because we think, like Sri Aurobindo's, everything is divine presence because it's the divine involuted into matter that becomes creation in the first place. So the idea that the divine presence in Christianity happens in the form of Holy Spirit, which has some containment and limitations, means, okay, this is Holy Spirit space, but this here is not. So now you're back to the sacred versus secular divide, which is there in the Western thought. Sacred versus secular. Now this problem is very sacred versus profane, as they call it. Now this is a serious problem.
I don't like the word profane.
Sacred versus unsacred or something like that. This is sort of, but the idea of Brahman, Sagun Brahman, as sort of the whole cosmos is a different concept than, and it would not allow monotheism to sort of contain it.
You see, I think this is one particular area where, if we come back to what we were saying right at the very start, where mutual engagement could be very helpful to both sides, but particularly to, if one has to use the word side, particularly to us, because I find that whole doctrine, the whole Hindu doctrine of immanence, actually enormously attractive and enormously relevant to the whole problem of the environment and all that has happened to it. And I find that the presence of God, in the rare occasions when it really does come to me, usually comes through the beauty of nature, actually. That's, sometimes it comes through the beauty of liturgy and the repetition of things, words that I've known and loved for 70 or more years, but often it comes through the beauty of nature. And when it comes to the beauty of nature, then you do feel this immanence of God in all nature.
Sure.
So this is an area in which we should be talking to each other.
And in this respect, I want to say I'm writing another book, which looks at the major Christian thinkers who engaged Hinduism and Buddhism in a positive sense, spent their whole life studying it, Panikkar, Reed Griffiths, Father Ryan, Teilhard de Chardin. Teilhard de Chardin wrote a lot of commentary on Ramanuja's Vedanta, Vishishta Vedanta. He spent couple years in India. So there's a lot of, for the last 150 years or so, 100 or more years, there's been a lot of Hindu and Buddhist influences on Christian thinkers. And Jung had an influence, and before that American transcendentalists brought a lot of influence. So the Hindu and Buddhist influences or spiritual influences on very serious Western exemplars and leaders, some of them official church people, some of them not so much so. Ralph Waldo Emerson resigned from the church in a famous speech at Harvard by saying that this exclusivity and this monotheism no longer suffices, and then he was disbarred from coming back to Harvard to give a speech, and he was a very big name at that time, and he actually did that. And the reason he did that is uncovered in a book that we sponsored an American scholar called Gordon to write, called Emerson and the Light of India. And Emerson had studied the Vedas. He was very deeply influenced by Vedic thought, and he'd come to this kind of a conclusion. So the history of such influences that have worked their way into Christianity in different ways is of great interest to me, because I see huge potential. I see huge potential for this kind of work to continue. And probably the latest exemplar was Panikkar, who was really into Hindu thought for most of his life, while remaining a Christian, and wanting to see what all can be brought into Christianity from Hinduism, and always struggling with how far can I go in the appropriation of Hinduism without kind of distorting Christianity or without undermining the basic doctrine of Christianity. So this is a sort of how elastic is the doctrine question.
But then I would say that's excellent work and very important. But equally, should you not be doing some work on the influence of Christianity on Hindu thinkers,
Yes.
and the influence of Christianity on Mahatma Gandhi, who you admire so much.
Yes,
you know.
I definitely appreciate that. I think that's a modern, the development of modern Hinduism in the last 100 years, 150 years, 200 years, from Ram Mohan Roy, the influence through Ram Mohan Roy and various others.
But you seem dismissive of Ram Mohan Roy.
Well, I felt that Ram Mohan Roy was sort of not very clear. He was moving around a lot. He was a Christian, he was a Hindu, he was a Christian, he was a Hindu, kind of, he was both ways. But I think that influence has entered. Now, so the influence has entered in both ways. But I think the asymmetry is there. The asymmetry is there. When a history-centric idea and a non-history-centric idea merge, the history-centric has some minimum non-negotiables that it does not want to give up. So it can assimilate the other. The other doesn't have these kinds of history-centric requirements that it will not negotiate from. So it is easier for a history-centric Christian to say, okay, I'll bring in yoga and I'll cross-leg sit on the floor and we'll wear saffron and we'll do puja with agarbatti and we'll put mala on Jesus and Mary. We'll do all that without tampering with their basic history-centric story. It is not possible for a Hindu to assimilate enough ideas, enough of the strong ideas of Christianity because to really do that you have to accept the historicity which we were talking about, and the moment you do that you become a Christian.
Well, I don't think you do necessarily, you see. I mean, for instance, you can certainly incorporate maybe the idea of love, which is so strong in Christianity, you know. That's one that you could incorporate. Mahatma Gandhi thought, and of course this brings us to this very interesting points that you make about morality, but Mahatma Gandhi thought you could bring Christian morality very much. I mean, he said words to the effect, I don't care if Jesus lived or didn't live, but I still deeply admire his moral teaching. So these are things which could be brought in. But you see, the problem in your book is that when you talk about enculturalization, which here in Delhi the Jesuits do beautifully, if you go to the Mass in the Jesuit Formation Center here in Delhi, Vidya Jyoti, you will see that it is full of Hindu symbolism, you know. But you say, seem to suggest that this is trying to steal Hinduism or undermine Hinduism.
There's two points here. Good points, both of them. So the point about love and morality, there are excellent correlates. I mean, it fits. The ideas of love and morality are so profound in both traditions. It's a good place to have a common dialogue and exchange and learn and improve. Because the love and dialogue Hinduism has without history-centrism. My reason for loving someone is because in the ultimate reality we are the same. It is not that I have to love in order to get me to heaven. It is not for a reward. It is because ultimately we aren't different. So that is a very profound reason for love also.
But let me come in here. One thing, I wouldn't say that in Christianity you love in order to get to heaven.
Okay.
You love because love is basic, or you try to love, because love is, in a sense, is the basic characteristic of God, and that puts you in touch with God.
Yes. So there is a dualistic love idea, and there is a non-dualistic love idea, and Hinduism has both. The Bhakti tradition has both, dualistic and non-dualistic side.
Well, I was going to say that. Exactly.
It has both of that. Now, coming back to inculturation, the inculturation which is taking symbols and is very explicit, that says we are doing Christianity, but we're using symbols to respect the local culture, is fine with me. The inculturation that I have a problem with is a bit duplicitous, a bit deceptive, when they go to a village and the person doesn't even know that he's actually been shifted from his ancestral tradition because it's done with a sleight of hand. And I have been in Tamil Nadu. I wrote a previous book with a co-author and went around and he translated some of the stuff, and I understand what the inculturation is. So their inculturation in the less informed places has not been a sort of an intellectually profound synthesis of two traditions, but more kind of a way, let's get in the door. and become received without any defensiveness on the other side, to kind of bring down the defenses of the other side. So now this kind of enculturation takes us to the topic of missionaries. Other form of enculturation, which I think is sort of has an agenda to convert. So it is very clear that I want to enculturate, to bring down the defenses, so that I'm received and welcome. And then once I'm welcome, I go through the next stage of saying, okay, let's do puja to Jesus. And we're not right away going to throw out the local deity, but we want to just keep it ambiguous and undefined. But then as the person gets a little stronger and stronger into the Christian side, then we are going to, at one point in time, either for that generation or their kids' generation, actually abuse the deity as idolatry and bad things and throw it out. So if you look at how enculturation evolved in South America, which is where the church perfected it, as a 3-generation thing. First generation, get yourself invited in the door with local symbols. Second generation, have both present, the local deity and the Christian deity. And third generation, remove the local deity and tell the people that this used to be your primitive parents and they were all bad guys and now you're properly Christian. So, and then in Africa it was done. Now there is this kind of a theology happening in India. So my concern is that, and this brings us to the topic of missionaries, of conversion. So if we want to have a dialogue which says, how do we go together using good things from each other so we can mutually learn and enrich ourselves, do you think it would be a good idea to say, okay, for 20 years, let's have a ceasefire on aggressive conversion, and let's create an atmosphere where there isn't mutual suspicion that on the one hand we're having a conversation, but on the other hand these guys, boys, are out there in the village trying to mess around. So why wouldn't the Pope do that? I mean, it would be such a Pope could change the course of world history if he were to go out publicly and announce pluralism. Okay, we're not against your forms of worship. We respect your claims to truth, and we want you to accept ours. We don't see any reason to go out and convert you and call you heathens and call you bad things and so on, which they do, because I go and film all that. What do you think of that?
Well, I think first of all that if you look at the documents of the Vatican II, there was the beginning of a whole change towards other religions, and there's a whole document about the relationship of the Church with other religions. Secondly, of course, I don't speak as a Roman Catholic. I am very much an Anglican. Thirdly, yes, I think the whole question of missionaries and of conversion is hugely important and quite difficult. But I think if you take the situation on the ground in India, and India is the only place I really know well, the what I might call mainstream churches, certainly the Church of North India, Church of South India, which are the offshoots of the Anglican Church here, and the Roman Catholic Church, are very, very cautious about conversion.
Yeah.
A Jesuit said to me recently, a lovely remark, he said, conversion is God's business, and he doesn't seem to be very interested in it.
Well, that would be a very good thing.
Which I think
but
is
see,
a lovely
if the Pope, I know you don't speak for the Pope, but if some people at the highest authority would actually go on the record and say that, because after all, they have so many official policies, it's a very top-down, official, multinational style management. So it's not as if everything goes and people can do what they want. It's a very corporate controlled organization. The church is a multinational, if you think. So why not the CEOs of these multinationals, reflecting on what you've said, make that policy and say, we don't want to be upsetting people and bothering their cultures and going around sending armies of missionaries to convert.
Well, you see, there is a problem here, because one thing which the Pope feels very strongly is that he talks about, I'm not sure whether he uses actually this, but words to the effect of the reconversion of Europe and that sort of thing. And he feels that there are hard swathes of the world, particularly Europe, which were Christian and which are no longer Christian.
But he should
and which
focus on
he
that.
Feels should be become Christian.
So
again,
what if we had a deal which said Hindus will help you re-Christianize Europe and then you leave India alone? Would that be a good deal?
I don't think that would be the right way to put it.
Okay,
I think that would be
alright.
un-Indian and un-Hindu, actually.
All right, all right.
I think I come back to this original point
Okay.
that please, by all means, be in India. You have been in India ever since St. Thomas, perhaps, certainly a lot longer than the Imperial Church came here. And we are very happy that you are here. But to use your word, which I like so much, let us live side by side with respect for each other. And that would mean, respecting each other would mean that, in my view, that you do not go out aggressively and try and convert people. You do not go around the place saying your religion is idolatry and our religion is true.
Right.
You simply don't do
This
that.
would be such a breakthrough.
But if people come to you
Yeah.
and say, I'm interested in
That's
Jesus,
fine.
just as I have come to you saying I'm interested in Hinduism,
That is absolutely correct.
then that, I think, is absolutely fine.
Sure.
But I do believe, and you would have to talk to the Archbishop of Delhi or talk to the Jesuits here, who we talked about before, ask them. They would be very good people to ask what is their actual view on conversion now.
Yes. All I know is that in the rural areas, it's like really big business.
Yeah,
and
but
there's a
that's-
lot of middlemen.
but Rajiv, my understanding is that is almost entirely what I would call American hot gospel conversions. I don't think the Roman Catholic Church is going out any longer.
No, it's mainly Protestants and these Pentecostal types,
Yeah.
but it's also Lutheran Church from Northern Europe. The Lutheran Church
Well,
from
I've never come across that.
Mormons. It's a whole lot of different kind of.
Mormonism, of course,
They're all very
quite
aggressive.
different to Lutheran.
Yes, of course, but Lutheran Church also.
If you look on the internet, there you find that you do find very much evidence of what I might call American extreme Protestant attempts to convert.
But you know, it's what.
But we can't stop that.
Sure,
you know.
but you know, the strange thing is that while Europe domestically
Mm.
has become secularized and less Christian,
Mm.
10% of, or some amount of the tax in Germany
Mm.
and some Scandinavian countries
Mm.
goes to the church.
Mm.
And since they cannot really use it for domestic Christianization very effectively, they export it to places like India. So they're losing numbers there and wanting to compensate by converting here. But it creates a kind of violence.
Well, I would need to see evidence of
Yes,
that
yeah, I
to
can
be
show.
convinced,
I can show you that. In fact, in a previous book I did, a lot of these churches in Germany and the Scandinavian countries, Finland, Norway, these sort of countries, are exporting to India, while domestically the churches are empty. In fact, they're taking Indian priests to preach there because they don't have enough priests there.
that is, it's certainly the Roman Catholic Church takes some Indian priests to preach, but that I see nothing wrong
There's
with
nothing wrong with
at
that.
all. But let me say, there's a very great danger in taking this conversion argument too far. If you take this conversion argument too far, you are absolutely providing mana to people who disgrace Hinduism, like Togadia, the head of the Vishwa Hindu Parishad. I have heard Togadia speak, and in the book which I'm hoping to get a copy to you of, I quote Togadia. And one of the things he says to preach hostility against Christianity is to say that these people are going out and that the Pope has a special army he's sending out.
But do you
to convert
think?
people.
Do you think the way that if they stop converting, it will take the thunder out of his speech?
Yes, and that particular thunder. Yes.
So if that is the weapon being used intellectually and emotionally to build up a huge political mobilization, then why not just deplete that by stopping conversion? Because then there's nothing to argue about.
But I think, you see, we're arguing that I'm not necessarily against stopping conversion.
Okay.
And I think lots of us
I think
are
you are
against
yes,
stopping conversion. What I'm saying is that, as I understand the position in India, and please do go and check it with authorities in both these churches, the two mainstream churches, the Church of North India and South India, which are both, as you know, were born out of an amalgamation of Anglicanism with some Protestant sects, and the Roman Catholic Church, are not going out and aggressively converting any longer. That is my understanding of the position.
Sure.
We cannot control
Sure.
the wilder extremes of
Just to give you a little bit about
Christianity.
my personal experience with Christianity and Jesus, which has
Yeah.
been quite positive.
Yeah.
I was raised in a Catholic school in Delhi. I
Yeah.
went to St. Columbus
Yes.
from the kindergarten till the end.
Yeah.
I never stopped being a Hindu
Mm.
because we went to Swami Chinmayanand's Gita classes.
Mm.
So we went to many tirthas. We were very much with the Ramakrishna Mission people, with various places. So through family and through my own personal study, and I was studying the Sri Aurobindo when I was a teenager in school. So that grounded me. And the Catholicism of the school was something I looked at and observed. It was not imposed on me. I mean, maybe things are different now, but at least in those days, it was never imposed on a person unwillingly or by force. And I got a really nice education in the secular fields, mathematics, physics, language, all these kind of things I studied. But the understanding and insight into the Bible was sort of like, here is a faith that some people have, and I would like to know about it. But as far as my own faith is concerned, based on the Gita and the Vedas, it was never compromised. So my take on what I got out of it was an exemplary life of Jesus, and a lot of things I can learn from it. A kind of a Gandhian view, not taking the historicity very seriously, and actually. Most Indians, when I talk about history centrism, most Indian scholars, even scholars of religion, hear it for the first time because they didn't know that it's such a big deal for Christians until I tell them. I tell them, go test it. Go test it and say, I love Jesus, I love his message, but it is not important that he's historical. And then see what reaction you get. And you do your own survey, you don't have to believe me. You do your own survey and say that, okay, if the historicity of Jesus is not important, the exemplar role he's playing, morality, love, all that we think is absolutely fantastic. So he's one of the greatest persons that lived. But the uniqueness of the Nicene Creed and history centrism is to be left out. See what you will get. Now, this discovery of mine, of the history centrism of the West, happened after I went to the United States. And there I discovered just how fixated people are with their history centrism. And that made me just go for 10 years or longer to do this research and talk to a lot of people. And I found that those Westerners who are in a yoga center, there's a lot of them doing yoga nowadays, when I asked them about history centrism, it's something that they've tried to not deal with because it's sort of discomforting that I'm doing this thing. And one of the teachings is to transcend name, identity, form, transcendence, unity consciousness, and kind of ahistorical approach. But at the same time, I have not come to terms with my traditional religion, which is Judeo-Christian. Many of them find it uncomfortable to have the conversation. Many of them are so excited to have the conversation because they think it will clarify their choices, and they will decide where to draw the line. So I do get that, the person who says, thank you very much, I know if I want to remain a Christian, these are sacrosanct beliefs, and the moment I feel that line is being crossed, I'll at least know about it. And then there's those who say, thank you for telling me, because now I'm really clear that I do not want to be history-centric, which is why I came here in the first place. So you get a wide range of reactions from Christians in yoga centers as a response to the sharpening of this issue of historical uniqueness or not. So that's my story of how I came about writing.
Yeah, but let me say this. First of all, your experience in St. Columba's Church, I could think in my own mind of probably 100 people I have met who have been to schools like St. Columba's, either run by the Christian Brothers or the Jesuits. And all of them, I never met a person actually who went to one of those schools who said that they tried to convert me. Never met a single person. So in a way that backs my argument that the Roman Catholic Church is not going around this country trying to do mass conversions. I'm not saying it didn't in the past. We all know about the phrase rice Christians, for instance.
Right.
On this question of historicentrism, which you come back and back to, yes, I'm surprised that people were not aware of this. I mean, I was aware, of course, as a student of theology many years ago,
yes.
We studied the historical Jesus. I made a television program called The Four Faces of Jesus, which are four different interpretations of the historical Jesus. And theology has swung, Christian theology has swung at times from great interest in exactly who the historical Jesus was, to theologians saying we can never know who the historical Jesus was.
Yes.
So I'm surprised that people didn't realize the importance of history. But I come back to what is much more important to me, much more important than the debate about the historical Jesus, is this whole debate which you do say somewhere. I've taken a note of it. Let me see, which seemed to me to be the whole key to the book, which was really this idea of sapsakola dharma.
Yes.
And the idea then...
Sapeksha dharma.
Sapeksha dharma. Yeah, I can't read my... I can't read my
that is actually the center of the whole book.
And that this means that in some ways, why do we want to get fixed on the historical Jesus?
Yes.
And the historicity of it,
right,
when there are so many areas where we could come together.
And I want to explore that with you.
You see, I think one of the most fascinating things you talk about is morality, and is this concept of an absolute and a personal morality,
right,
and this concept of contextual morality.
Right.
Because, again, in Christianity now, this is one of the biggest debates.
Right.
See, it comes up in the whole area of the most controversial issues in Christianity, like homosexuality, family planning, admission of divorced people to receive the sacraments of the church. All these things, the whole question really is, why, as Christians, can we not bring more context into morality?
Yes.
And why is the Pope so afraid of the relativism which he sees this as?
Yes.
So if Hinduism comes and explains, as you have explained, and talks from people's experience and everything, that contextual morality does not have to degenerate into rank relativism.
The whole dharma is like that. The whole dharma is like that.
But this is the sort of point.
This is a big discussion.
But this is the sort of discussion you should be having.
Yes.
Because you see, the fear is, and there's a justifiable fear here, that what actually, if you call it contextual morality, could well degenerate into
moral relativism.
I'll decide what
moral relativism.
Yeah, I quite like getting drunk. So for me, getting drunk is not important.
Yeah.
I'm still loving God in other ways. Or still,
I think this issue has been so thoroughly examined and cross-examined and debated and argued. The flexibility and contextuality of dharma on the one hand, and on the other hand, not letting it slip into anything goes. This is and who has the authority, and by what process, at what state of consciousness do you have the authority? But on one point, before we move on, you mentioned that you were surprised at my remark that people did not understand the importance of historicity in Christianity. I was referring to Indian scholars, especially gurus and academic scholars. I had a panel discussion on my book in Delhi University a few days ago. Out of the three panelists, there was one remarkable political scientist from JNU who got it. I thought he got it. But there were two social scientists who just didn't get it. I mean, they just didn't. And then, then in so many conversations I'm having, when I tell them why the historicity of Jesus and the virgin birth and the resurrection and all that is important, and you cannot just say, we'll take the moral lessons and live a good life, and we are the same as a Christian, because there is something different about the historicity. And this has to do with the basic cosmology of God, infinite separation from man, needing intermediaries, prophets or son to come and bridge the gap, and it is not for man to raise his consciousness and every person being able to achieve it for themselves. So this fundamental difference in cosmology is very important, and I found that a large number of people in India are very confused about this, and maybe it's the guru effect. So I was referring to that. I was not referring to Westerners. I think that Westerners are very clear on the history centrism, especially I find Americans consider this to be a remarkable insight. You see, it's like a fish might not experience water because it just doesn't know anything else. So somebody comes and tells that, listen, this is history centrism. Then a lot of Americans say, but I never thought that there's something unusual about that. Isn't everybody like that? Isn't that the nature of religion? How could you be religious without that? So that's my opening. My opening in the talk is to say, okay, how many of you think that history is important for religion? Or everybody raise a hand. And how many of you think that if history were all gone, forgotten, or for some reason we just disowned it, that it would be possible to live a good religious life? And very few people raise their hands. So this is a very interesting opening for me to explain to them a different way of spiritual life that is not history-centric. So that's how I evolved this book. Now, as far as common things, let's talk about that now. How do we take this forward? I think that the mystics are a good place, that there have been mystics in various traditions, and they have experienced states of consciousness, and that I've discussed in this book, the mysticism.
But you see a difference between...
I see a difference because I felt that the history-centrism in the institutional power of the church always trampled upon them and did not allow them to develop lineages, because you need multi-generational, you need a guru with a mystic with a follower or lineage, then many more to really let it mature. And if they hadn't trampled upon Meister Eckhart type people and many others, then I think there would have been a whole yoga kind of tradition in the West. So it's the mystic is not a power-oriented guy. So my feeling is that the society at large didn't go and give them enough support against the establishment to create an alternative approach. Like in India, if a mystic comes and says, I have had this experience, you'll have 1 million people at his doorstep. So why that didn't happen in Christianity when there were mystics, and why they didn't get the support,
But there are mystic traditions. I mean, for instance, the Jesuits have a very closely well-defined tradition of mysticism. There are, what I thought, where I did think there was a difference, was slightly different, where you talked about samadhi.
Right.
And that as being a permanent state, basically.
Right.
Whereas, yes, Christian mysticism, of course, does not put you permanently in touch with God.
And that's very big theological point.
But what would be very interesting would be to discuss, though, whether in fact, rather than in theory, if I could put it like that, Hindu mystics do experience long nights of darkness, which Christian mystics very commonly do,
Yes.
And you had the whole question of Mother Teresa's amazing revelation in her book that for years she felt out of touch with God. St. John of the Cross, for instance, is another one. Whether really, because you see, it's going to be misleading for people if one's going to tell them that there is this experience you could have where you are constantly on what I might call a spiritual high, when in fact they're going to fall over the cliff sometimes, as the Christians have experienced.
But you see, this takes us to...
And one more thing.
Sure.
If not, if it is right, that if it is, come to history perhaps, almost, if it is historically, experientially proved that you really can have this constant state of spiritual high, then it's a very important lesson for Christian mystics and people who are interested in mysticism and are Christians to learn.
Yes. Now, this idea of Satchitanand as the nature of the self and as the same essence as God is so sort of deep in Hindu ideas, among Hindu ideas, that the recovery of that being a human potential available to everyone is sort of a fundamental tenet. So to say that the mystic in theory can reach a certain state temporarily and not as a permanent state denies that permanent state is his very essence. That is the very essence of the person. So
let me just interrupt there. I just want to be clear on one thing. The fact that Satchitanand is within you in a way, and the fact that you are part of the one great unity, does that mean, though, it doesn't clearly mean, because this is a fact as far as you're concerned. Sitting here,
Yes.
we are part of the one great unity.
Yes.
But neither you nor I at the moment
Are
realizing Satchitananda or
Correct.
anything like that,
Correct.
are we? You
Correct.
know?
That is correct.
Um,
So it's a truth claim, as is the truth claim you have about Jesus' historicity, which you got through historical institutional transmission, because
Yes.
you weren't present there.
Yeah.
And just like I haven't experienced the Satchitananda that the rishis did, and therefore for me to accept it is a truth claim that I wish to follow, it's no more or less than your truth claim that there was a historical Jesus, because you weren't present there either.
Well,
Or your truth claim about the nature of heaven, that what happens in heaven is also something that the person here has not experienced. So these are, I would call them truth claims rather than truths. And evaluate truth claims and show and appreciate their distinctiveness, neither one necessarily being scientifically verifiable. But one thing I will say about the truth claim of living enlightenment, that in theory, it is possible to find such an exemplar, in theory. It may be very rare, but it may be one person in many generations who actually achieves that. But in theory, since that is the essence of each person, it is possible. Whereas in theory, to know exactly what happened to Jesus and where he was in the missing years, which some say is in India or whatever.
Yeah, but you see, I think,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt
Yeah.
you there, but I think these are two different things.
Okay.
You see, knowing where Jesus was in the missing years had nothing to do with mysticism, in my view.
Fine.
Satchitanand and St. John of the Cross
Right.
are to do with mysticism.
But
you see. And I think incidentally that this is a particularly important area, because mysticism is something which in our times seems to be particularly attractive to people.
And so we can bring people into a conversation through mysticism.
Yeah.
So if Satchitanand, the claim, is in theory possible to verify, because a person could achieve it, but in practice very difficult. The claim of permanent separation from God, even in heaven, is also, one could subject it to the same argument and say, how do you know? How do you know, what is the afterlife? How do you prove it? It's also a claim. So we have claims and claims, both sides.
But again, then you see, if you're going to describe it like that, you've got to be quite careful, because it's not separation from God. Yes, I can understand where you're coming from, but there's also a closeness or a witness with God as well. I mean, that's what mysticism is really about, an awareness of God, isn't there?
Yes.
And if you read St. John of the Cross, it is almost erotic. The closeness is so close.
But it's still two entities that are
Yes.
intimately close.
Yeah, but again, you see, what I think we have to do time and again, and this is where I think your discussions could be so important, is we've not got to keep on going back, I don't think, to the dualism, to the historicity.
Okay.
We've got to come also, all the time, to what we have together as well.
So what we
there is a very real reason for this, in my view, which I wanted to come to before we finish. That is that it seems to me that the more that we can demonstrate that man as a human being, in different contexts, in different historical circumstances, has always searched for the divine, the transcendental.
Yes.
And that with many differences, nevertheless there is a commonality
This is a
of
quest.
experience and a commonality of experience.
Yes.
This is a huge argument.
This is a huge argument.
Against the ghastly people like Richard Dawkins,
Yes.
who want to say it's all nonsense.
And that's a great opening for a final point I want to discuss with you, which I think is bringing us together.
Yeah.
And that is the way secularism has taken over Indian intellectual life.
Oh, don't talk about it.
It's produced a couple of generations of people who are not only ignorant about religion and not only have no quest and no idea about the spiritual life, but outright hatred and cynicism for it. And I wonder what you think of that, because that seems to be a common problem that religious people must be facing.
I think it's deplorable. I think that there has been an impact of secularism, not on ordinary people so much. I think that this has led, I've experienced it in my own life, to people thinking that if you speak about Hinduism, if you express admiration for Hinduism, you are automatically a supporter of the VHP or the RSS. And this is a direct impact, I think, of wrong secularism. And I would also say that the secularist politicians are just as guilty of misusing religion as the BJP are. I deplore the use of religion for political purposes.
By anybody?
By anybody.
Muslim, Hindu, Christian, secular, anybody.
And the secularists do it just as much. For them, it's a wonderful issue to beat the BJP with, so they don't want it to go away, actually.
So do you feel that, it seems that this anti-Hindu kind of public sentiment in the name of secularism, I don't know if this was present in Nehru's time. It certainly wasn't, I think Indira Gandhi respected, her religiosity quite a bit. So it seems to have been a more recent thing. Something happened. And something happened, and I wasn't in India at that time, and I was visiting but not living here. And I'm wondering what happened that polarized this, that there is one camp only that can champion Hinduism, and anyone who champions Hinduism is going to be by default branded a part of that camp. So, anytime I talk about why Hinduism is distinct or give a talk on it or whatever, then I have to defend why, I'm not a member of BJP. And this is a very, very amazing, I don't get this question in the United States. I don't get, Americans do not think that a person, that an Indian who's lived there for 40 years, if he talks about his spiritual tradition, that there's some kind of political agenda or something wrong with it, because Americans expect that everybody would be talking about their spiritual tradition. But somehow in India it's considered, suspicious. And I wonder if you have an insight into why this sort of a recent thing.
Well, I think the more prominent the BJP has become, the more it's become a major political force in the country, the more that the Congress has hollered about secularism and given this mistaken view that to be secularist means to be anti-religious,
yes.
And that anyone who is religious is communal. I think that is perhaps one of the reasons why it has increased. But there was always a certain strain. Nehru's own attitude to religion was quite strange.
Yeah, really. He was mixed up also. But he was not against it.
No, he wasn't against it, but I think he was deeply influenced by Western rationalism.
But Gandhi, for sure, was very deeply immersed in Dharma.
Oh yes, absolutely.
So until then, things were, if he had it his way, if it wasn't Nehru, but a Gandhian kind of a nation, then there would be more power in the panchayats, in the villages, and the traditional lifestyle, the native spiritual tradition would be empowered. So it's interesting that the party that sort of claims allegiance to Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, is actually, in its actual views and lifestyle, quite the opposite.
Yes. Yeah.
So that you share.
Yes.
So now the academic authorities who seem to control, a lot of the textbooks and journals and syllabus and what gets in, seem to be this view that we've just called the secularist kind of a problem. Is it correct to say that this is a Western influence, and it's a huge amount of funding, whether it's the Ford Foundation or whether it's foundations like that, and I'm not picking on any one of them, but a huge spread of Western soft power through ideologically brainwashing a couple of generations of young Indians, taking them to the West, getting them educated, sending them back, has produced this sort of an outcome?
No, I don't think it's so much that.
Okay.
I think it's more to do with the whole completely muddled thinking about what is secularism, what place religion can have in the life of the country. It's the sort of muddled thinking which leads to some of the absurdities in the West, like arguing whether it's right to celebrate Christmas or not, that sort of thing.
Right.
It comes down really to that. And it's absurd in India, because India, basically, apart from this academic nonsense, the everyday life of India is a demonstration that people should be allowed and are allowed and peacefully do practice their religion totally openly. You
Sure.
know, I mean, I've often said this, but it's unimaginable in this country to think that anyone could say to a woman, take your burqa off, or a sada, you're not allowed to wear a pagri.
Right.
So I think the academics who do these sort of things, and it's also political, because again, you see, when the BJP was in power, then you know all about the rows about the history textbooks and how the
Big fight over that.
yeah.
Big fight over that.
And now the Congress is back, and so they want to obscure all
Pendulum
that.
going back and forth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes.
So,
yes.
what do you think of Indian media? Because as a important and famous, prominent media person, what do you think is happening in Indian media? Because I find it very strange. I mean, especially its treatment of religion and its treatment of serious issues. I mean, I don't get this kind of a topic of discussion on television. I don't get it in newspapers. I see some pop culture and Bollywood and all that is fine. It's more like infotainment, or my idea is that this Times of India is like a tabloid now. What do you think?
Well, I think, to be fair to the media, that I think in the Times of India, Hindu, Express, the newspapers, most of them do have comments, not so much about religion in a theological sense, but more or religion in a political sense.
Yeah, the violence,
but
the fights.
Spiritual,
Okay.
they do have.
Okay.
Of course, the fights which break out from time to time are reported, but sadly, again, the background to those fights is frequently very badly reported. So everyone goes away thinking it was a Hindu-Muslim riot, when really it was some Hindu politician or some Muslim politicians causing trouble because he was going to get political benefit out of it. You know. So you don't get, what you do get though is columns on spirituality. And the Hindu has one every day.
Generic, very generic kind of, not very deep though.
Well, yes, but how deep can you be in 800 words, you know?
Do you think the problem is that we do not have religious studies as an academic discipline in India, which in the United States is a very big discipline, to take a formal university course on comparative religions and get coverage on what the religions are saying is one of the most widely available humanities curriculum, of course. And here we don't have religious. In Delhi University, there's no religious.
You see, there's this strange contrast in this country, where a country where people of all religions live together peacefully, basically. There are occasional outbursts of trouble, but there are outbursts of trouble almost anywhere. And as I said, these are usually political, not religious. At the same time, you have a government and the whole sect, and very influential sector, who say, don't touch religion, don't touch religion, don't touch religion.
Right.
In part, to be fair to them, in part it is because, of course, they see religion as being the issue which split the country.
So you think it goes back to that?
And think in part it does.
Yeah.
In part it does.
Because for me to submit a book proposal like this, if I were to say a topic religion, mainstream publishers not interested. They think it's a BJP book. I mean, they just don't get it. That there is such a thing. There's a legitimate pursuit of religious philosophy and comparative religion as an intellectual pursuit, and it has nothing to do with any political party right now. So
but you are being allowed to promote it.
Yes, I am having a good time, and I'm being interviewed at a lot of TV places and having a lot of events. But I'm just reflecting the cynicism that's out there also towards.
Yes, I think it's fear as well as cynicism in a way, and it's unthought out reaction as well.
But I must say that I'm very happy at the openness with which this is being received so far by people from all sorts of backgrounds who feel that it's at least raising some questions they want to think about and starting some conversations. So that takes me to the final point. We're going to have a Banaras Hindu University event January 31 next year. I'd love to invite you for that. And our mutual friend Navarro is organizing it. To continue this conversation with more people. And I'm hoping that you can bring some Jesuits or Anglican theologians or people like that, and we can see the common ground more clearly.
Yes, well, I mean, I would be delighted to come if I can. I don't know that I can summon Jesuits or Anglicans, but...
Okay, but as yourself.
Yes, yes, if I can, certainly, yes.
Yeah, and maybe you can bring some other people also, and we can continue this discussion.
Yeah.
Would you like to do that? Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Well, do you have any closing remarks? Or
No, my only closing remark would be that I hope that from this book arises another book that Rajiv will write, which will be one which will now look at not just looking at each other with mutual respect, but achieving mutual benefit out of that respect.
Yeah, and I definitely want to make this take this up as a commitment from my side, because I am working on what would be a spiritual path which doesn't compromise the minimum requirements of either and gives the maximum benefit to each other. That's I think in a nutshell.
Well, that's that, but also
as a philosophical inquiry.
But also I think very importantly to demonstrate to the world that there is a common experience of religion,
Yes.
of God, of transcendent, call it whatever you like,
Yes.
Which is common to all men at all times in their history.
Yes.
It has been affected, as you rightly say, all transmission of wisdom, of enlightenment, transmission of enlightenment to others, is always affected
Yes.
by history, by individuals' perceptions, by cultures they have learnt. But still underlying it all, there is, and that we are all engaged on a common enterprise as well.
That's wonderful, and thank you, Mark, for taking the time. This has been an honor and a pleasure for me to do that.
Great pleasure for me.
Yes, wonderful.
Thank you,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.